Welcome to the Drawing Board. I'm your host and in-house artist Erin Leffler. If you've joined us before here on the Drawing Board, welcome back. And if this is your first time, welcome. Here's a quick rundown of what happens here on the show. Every episode of the Drawing Board, I invite guests from around the entertainment industry, and we learn a little bit more about what they do. And while we learn about what they do, I also draw them. Pretty fun, right? Well, due to having a variety of guests, today we're going to focus on a topic that I know a lot of y'all are interested in, which is music, because my guest today is an incredible musician who I certainly am a big fan of. I've gotten to see him a few times in concert, and I'm sure that a lot of y'all will be interested in his work after we're done with this episode. Please welcome my guest, Jeff Kashiwa.
Hello, everybody. Hi, hi, Aaron. Thank you for having me on.
Thank you so much for being here. Now, for kids and adults like who may not be familiar with what you do you want to tell us a little bit about your job?
Yeah, my job is so much fun. I've got a different variety of jobs. The main one is I am a saxophonist. I'm a jazz saxophonist. And can you believe it? I remember being a young man in the eighth grade, right? That's when I fell in love with the saxophone. And at that time, someone named Chuck Mangione was very popular, Chuck Mangione, and a group called Spyro Gyra, and a keyboard player named Bob James. These were all up and coming artists, and I liked the way their music sounded. So I asked my parents, I want to do that for a living, and stayed in band all the way through high school and college, and I studied music and graduated with a degree in music, and began shortly after that. Got the good fortune of joining a nationally known group called the Rippingtons jazz group, and with them for two stints of 9 years, a couple decades there, I traveled all over the world. And in
That
the
is
interim of,
incredible.
oh, it's so much fun. Contemporary jazz, meaning a fusion of jazz, Latin, rock, funk, all just music, put just music stirred together, all instrumental though. And I got to see the world several times over. And in the interim, while I was on tour with them, I also started my own solo career, making my own albums. And that is what I'm doing to this day, is creating. I'm actually almost finishing my 11th album right now.
Wow,
And
11 albums. That's amazing.
yeah, so a lot of albums. And it's funny, I do these Facebook live streams now because you can't travel these days, right? So I'm just playing
No.
literally from home right here. I turn on the lights and turn on the microphone and play songs for people at their request. And it's kind of funny because the people are requesting super old songs, like from 10 years ago and more. And I have to research my own music. Like, I forgot how that went. I have to remember, I have to relearn how to play this song. But it's good for you. So I love the study of music. Um, and it's been a journey, truly has. And on top of the playing part of it and the writing and recording, I'm also an educator. So I teach at a college, Shoreline Community College, and I teach students how to do what I'm doing, how to make music with their computers, how to produce music, how to play music, how to record music, how to write music, etc. Yeah.
Awesome. Now, you had actually mentioned something in your answer there that kind of ties into my second question because a lot of times there's a lot of varied answers on schooling. Do you think that schooling is necessarily important to being in this career field?
Yes, I do. I really do. Let me explain. My thought is I'm a very strong believer in fundamentals. You can't, there's plenty of people who are brilliant musicians who play by ear, as they say. They don't know how to read music or don't know how to write music. They just play it by ear, literally. And there is nothing wrong with that. All I will add to that is that you can be and do so much more with fundamental training. You can connect with more musicians. You can write music for other musicians. You can play other musicians' music faster. Uh, but if you have the fundamentals down, reading, writing, etc. One of your questions kind of tied to education. I was reviewing your notes, and one of the questions that you had on your list was, is there anything I wish I would have known when I was in school? And that kind of ties into this question here, the subject here, and that is, while studying music is important, and I think you should take private lessons and really learn your craft as best you can. While that's important, it's not the only thing. And so, what I wish I would have done differently is taken more of like business courses, for instance, because that's stuff I had to learn outside of school, after I got my degree, and after I tried to figure out how to become a professional musician. I had to learn all the business acumen later while it was happening. So if I had to do it all over again, I would say, yeah, take a couple of business courses because that is part of staying afloat. Not only do you need to, sing or play well, and all the technical attributes of music, you also need to know how to run your business, which is you. So that's something I wish I would have
That
spent more
is
time.
that is some great advice. That's definitely one that I haven't heard that often, but really does come in play nowadays.
Oh, absolutely. There's a myth like, oh, musicians aren't good with money; they're always broke, and this and the other. That is that is only true of the broke musicians. there are there are plenty of musicians that are tremendously successful, and because they've used good business acumen, business training, to have their small businesses remain afloat. And so, that's the goal, isn't it? And it's not about. There's sometimes is a feeling like, gee, if I'm a musician and my focus is to make a bunch of money, then I'm not a real musician. I'm just faking it. I've sold out. That's not true at all. It's not. It's not selling out your art form. It's selling your art form. There's a difference. There's not selling out. It's selling it.
Absolutely. And I think that's a good thing to keep in mind too when it comes to this, because a lot of times people always say broke artist, starving artist, and that doesn't always have to be the case.
Absolutely not. And that's another thing I learned is you being starving and basically unsuccessful financially does not make your art and your music more true. No, it doesn't. It just makes it more uncomfortable. You can actually be comfortably financially and then also still write nice songs.
Absolutely. Now, you had mentioned Spyro Gyra before, which is an incredible group, but I'm sure there are plenty other people who also were huge inspirations for you in the field. Are there any that you can think of that inspired you at a young age?
Oh, so many, so many. Talk about inspiration. The way I looked at it is there are two kinds of musicians that you're going to meet in your travels. Two kinds of musicians: the kind of musician that inspires you, and the kind of musician that you inspire. And if you look at it in those terms, you're not talking about the duality of I'm better than that person and that person's better than me and so forth. It's just all about going forward with everyone's inspiration. So to answer your question, there have been many musicians that have inspired me. Um, we mentioned Spyro Gyra, but like Phil Woods is a great alto saxophone player. Of course, the greats who I know everyone's heard of: John Coltrane, Charlie Parker, Michael Brecker, David Sanborn, Pat Metheny. If you don't know any of these people, please Google them. They are considered to be the, you know, the forefathers of traditional and contemporary jazz. And there are so many more besides the brief list I just mentioned. But I also want to say that because of Facebook, you get with your thumb to scroll over a page and see hundreds of other musicians, and there have been some musicians, uh, the ripe old age of what, 8 and 7 and 13 years old. I've just my jaw has dropped as I've seen some extremely young musicians who are tremendously gifted, both in classical and jazz and other forms of music, that blow my mind. So when I talk about people who inspire me, I'm not just talking about people that are older than me. I'm talking they come in all different packages and size and shapes. And the the ego might step in and go, "Hey, this kid is only 8 years old. How could he be better than me? I'm an old man." That Set that ego aside. That ego is not helping you, right? That's a little voice in your head that's trying to protect you. Set it aside. Say, "Grandpa, quiet down." because because inspiration comes in all shapes and sizes and ages, and I am uh, thrilled when I am surprised to hear someone so young playing so well. It excites me. It's like I want to do that too. It makes me a kid again.
Well, that is awesome. And I know for certain anytime I see a video of a kid who's like 7, 8 years old playing violin or saxophone or something. It blows me away. I think it's amazing to see these kids that are so young and they're able to perfect the craft so well.
Oh yeah, I it's humbling, and you know it's it's just for me. I end up being uh, inspired. So that young person has now inspired me. Thank you for that. You know.
So, a non-serious question here, but it's one I love getting to talk about because a lot of times when I've gone to Comic Cons and I've gotten the chance to talk with kids, a lot of them have the same thought, thanks to social media and what we see today on TV, that the only way to be good at a job that we do is to only do that job all the time. So, I love getting to talk about hobbies and if they're important to our job. So, do you have any hobbies yourself and do you find they help you be better at your work?
Yeah. Um, it's kind of funny with this having to stream from your home these days. I guess my hobby is photography and videography. Not that I tend to pursue either professionally. I just am interested. Like for years, I've been studying saxophones and mouthpieces and reeds and microphones, all the things to do with music. But now I've shifted that curiosity to what kind of lens should I get for this camera? What are the best lights I should use for this situation? Just reading more technical stuff. I'm a very techie person. And so that kind of stuff fascinates me. So I guess that's a hobby.
Oh, awesome. I've only had one other person say videography and photography, so I think that's pretty cool. There's a lot of cool details that go into that.
Oh, yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating science.
So, a more serious side to the industry and business, because I think these are very important topics to talk about, especially with kids, because the kids are the incoming ones to this industry that usually when there's incomers, it helps make change. When it comes to competition and rejection, because a lot of times in the industry, we have to compete to get jobs. And then if we don't get them, we kind of feel like we got rejected. It's our fault. Do you think that competition should be everything, all the focus that a kid has coming into the industry? Or is it something they can use in like a healthy manner to help them be better in their own craft?
Oh, what a wonderful question, Aaron. Very good question. I'm a, yeah, that's a really good question. I think I'd have to say that it can be done in a healthy way if you never lose sight of the game aspect. Like when you say competition, you think of football game or some sort of a sport, and when it applies to the art form, it seems to not fit square, round peg, square hole, whatever. Um, so I think there can be healthy if you have a sense of brevity, a sense of lightness about it, like hey, this like this kid, this 8-year-old kid is really playing circles around me. I I better get on my horn and see if I can keep up with him. Kind of jokingly, that's an example of
Yeah.
like a healthier application of competitiveness. Here I am competing against a brilliant 8-year-old, but um, it it can be a very uh, I think it can be very disadvantageous, not helpful if you are overly competitive. If you're worried about how good someone is, how many followers they might have on Facebook, how many albums they sell compared to you, that is all the product of the ego trying to justify itself and protect itself. And the ego is the one thing that will really hang us up. So, because it's what happens is it unmotivates us. It makes us feel depressed and like we can't even win. We shouldn't even try because there'll always be someone better. There's always someone who plays faster or higher or sells more CDs or is richer or et cetera, et cetera. They drive a better car. You can go on and on and on, and that will drive you crazy, right? And it it what it does is it does your soul, your existence, it does it a disservice because it makes you think I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough. And that's the one very dangerous thought to have in your head. I'm not good enough. Because whatever you think becomes the truth. And you get to say and choose what you think. And if you choose to think, I'm not good enough, then that becomes your reality and you start acting accordingly. You stop practicing because, oh, what difference does it make? I'm not going to be good enough. See, it just starts this negative cycle. Whereas the opposite can be true. You can say, I am good enough. I have the skills it takes to do what I want to do. And it no longer becomes this thing of, what am I as good as this person over there? That's sort of that sort of thinking falls by the wayside and you just focus on yourself and what you want to do. So right now, for instance, as you're beautifully, I can't really see what you're doing, but as you're creating right before our very eyes, I don't think you are thinking, because I could see by the smile on your face that you enjoy it. I don't think you're thinking, yeah, but is it a Picasso? Yeah, but is it this? Yeah, but is it like you're not comparing it to something else? You're saying, I'm just making this in the moment. This is an expression for the now, and that's all we can do.
Absolutely. And I think that's probably one of the most beautiful ways it's been put on this show because a lot of times we do, as humans, compare everything we do to somebody else, especially in the day and age of social media. It's
Yeah,
almost like it's ingrained in us to do that. But the moment that you let go of it, it's like the most freeing feeling.
there. It's interesting. The Again with the Facebook thing, because everyone's on Facebook. Rather than focusing on how many likes you are getting, I think it's a good practice to go out there, search around, and see how many likes you can give. Look for things that you like. It's a very, very healthy exercise. It might be your friends, might be a complete stranger that you say, wow, this is impressive. I like this. And I think it's a good, healthy discipline or a good use of that format to turn it around and make it about others as opposed to yourself. I think it's a very healthy thing.
Absolutely. And that's a great thing too, practicing small acts of kindness like that. That's
Right.
always going to help get you farther in life.
Absolutely. Yeah. What happens is you start this flow that goes through you because when you give a compliment, something is leaving you. You're extending something to someone else, an energy that leaves your body. And some might think, well, then there's no energy left for me. That's not true. What you've done is created a vacuum for new energy to arrive. So that's the way it works.
Absolutely. Now, the second half of that thing that I mentioned earlier is rejection, which we often get in the industry, whether going up for jobs, deals with a label or something. And that can be a little tricky because we tend to take everything personally. Is rejection something that kids should be taking personally, or is it something that they can use to try to improve their work?
Yeah. Another great question. Rejection for something you've attempted to do is a part of life. And one thing that we have to remember is it's not fatal. And it doesn't mean you're a bad person. And it doesn't mean you're a failure. It just means you weren't right for that particular part, right? Like, for instance, auditioning. I thought, I remember auditioning when I graduated from high school and I auditioned for some conservatories. And I attempted to play some classical music on the saxophone, which I'd never done before. I've had zero training on this. So I could read music, so I was just reading the music, putting my little jazz phrasing in where I wanted to. And the guy looking at me over his glasses, the kind of like, what the hell is this? you know, kind of that was a big rejection. Like, we're not interested in having you come to our school. And I think I laugh at that now, but what I made it mean is not that I'm a bad person or a bad musician or a failure. It's that I've got a lot to learn because I don't know how to do this and I want to learn. And that's exactly what I did in college. I studied uh, uh, at the second college I went to, Cal State Long Beach. I studied classical music with a great teacher who, to this day, I think about the things he taught me. So, in other words, there was room to grow. That's what it is, room to grow.
Awesome. I think that's definitely something that everybody can take away, no matter what job they're in, is that we always have room to grow and stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, yeah, that's the thing. Once you stop growing, game over. Like if I know everything about jazz, which I never will, but if I did, that would be a very sad day because then there would be nothing new to excite me and interest me.
Absolutely. Now, a fun question because there's a lot that goes into this, and seeing as how you're almost on your 11th studio album, that seems like that's a lot of work. Do you want to walk us through a little bit what it's like to record an album?
Sure. It starts this last one started at this piano right behind me. These days, you can't see it, but I've got a what I call a MIDI keyboard, electronic keyboard, right in front of me. It comes out on a sliding table here, so that as I sit in front of my computer, I can uh, come up with musical ideas and program them into the computer. So that's basically how most things are created. But once in a while, I go old school and I sit at an actual piano and with a pencil and paper and attempt to find something that's interesting. And so I just free play, just random notes, random chords until I stumble across something. And I always tell students it's like you are on an adventure when you go to create music and you're an archaeologist and you have an idea like, kind of like the way this sounds. And then you don't know where in the song it's going to go. Is it the beginning of the song? Is it the ending of the song? Is it the middle of the song? I don't know. And I just keep on working with this musical phrase until it starts to become clear to me where it belongs. It's like putting a puzzle together. So that's how I write. So it's not like from beginning to end. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it's backwards. Sometimes who knows how the ideas will come to you. Um, and anyway, I formalize the ideas into a computer so that I can play it for my band and say, okay, Dave, my drummer, this is how I think the drum part should go. And Melvin, the bass player, this is how the bass part could go, but you can add your own thing to it. And off they go. I give it to the humans, my band, and they make it beautiful. Yeah. And then I record my saxophone on top. So that's basically how it's done.
That's really cool. And it also sounds like it's a highly collaborative process as well.
I like both. I like being by myself to get just my ideas formulated, and then handing it off to yes to have it being taken to the next level. Have, as I say, take this idea and bring it to life with what you do.
That's so cool. Now, with that, do you think it's important to be able to work well with others when working in this field?
Oh yes, that is that is so important. I can't overstate that. You you working well with others. What does that mean? It means listening to others and speaking clearly so that you can be heard. It means considering the points of view of others, in addition to your own concepts. And yes, it is how we are on stage is how you are socially. In other words, if you've ever been with a group of friends and you're, you choose the group of friends that you have because you just enjoy their company, but there's always seems to be a leader, like someone who kind of dominates the conversation or is extra funny or is extra outlandish, whatever. And there are those that are kind of along for the ride, part of the conversation but not leading it. And that's kind of what a band tends to be. It it molds, it's a living organism, a band. And we a good band will listen to each other and will give each other turns being the lead. And that's what I think jazz is.
Well, that's super cool. And I think that's always a good thing to keep in mind as well as letting others take turns being the lead. We can use that even in just hanging out with friends.
Yeah, yeah, I think the big part of when I'm on the road with my band, even though I haven't been for a bit now, uh, but when we're on the road, the best part of making music on stage is the off stage stuff, is the hanging out in the dressing room, is the going to dinner and talking and laughing. There's a trust that builds, a camaraderie and a chemistry that builds and strengthens when you do those social things, so that when you're on stage making music, it's there. Same kind of thing is there. Same kind of connection is there.
Absolutely. Now, a more serious sided question, but I think it's an important one to talk about because a lot of times we look around the industry, and while it's made a lot of strides, there's still a long way to go when it comes to diversity and being able to see people that look just like us doing the jobs that we like. Do you think it's important for kids to see people who look, sound, act, come from the same places that they do, doing the jobs that they love?
Yeah, I think it can be very helpful to see that, to see it more solidifies the possibilities for them. Like, if this person looks like me, it's possible I too can do something like that. And I think that is true. Yeah. And I've also, yeah, the it's interesting, the being Japanese American and I predominantly am involved with a an African American art form. It's not just African Americans. It can be jazz can be played by everyone, but if you want to look at the beginnings of jazz, at least the people I listened to were predominantly African American. So my thought was John Coltrane, Charlie Parker, Coleman Hawkins, Dexter Gordon, all African American. And I would think, well, I love the way they play. I'm connected to the way they play, but I'm not African American. So how can I do what they do? And the truth of the matter is, I discovered is you find your own way of doing it. You don't do it exactly like them, but it's not the race that is the the ingredient. It's the soul. It goes beyond skin. It's the heart, the inside of a human being that counts.
Absolutely. And I think that's a beautiful way to put it because a lot of times we don't feel like we can do things because we don't see anybody like us doing it. But if it comes from the heart and it comes from a good place, you can do anything that you put your mind to.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. If you're very still, if you can stop the mind, which wants to justify again with the ego, justify and make excuses and deny, etc., all that mental head stuff, the voices in your head, if you can quiet those for a second, you will feel the inspiration that's pulling you a direction. And I think if you follow that, you can't go wrong. So,
Absolutely. Now, a bit of a fun question. I feel like this is always something good to talk about because we see everything online, we see stuff on TV, and we hear stuff on the radio, and it all sounds perfect, but it doesn't always go so perfect when we're making something.
yeah.
Are there any memories you can remember, whether it was a mistake that you made accidentally or there was a mishap that ended up being a funny story down the road that maybe didn't go so well at the time?
Oh, there's countless. I'm talking about just basically making a mistake. Oh, countless examples, 1,000 examples. Um, I mentioned I've been doing some live streaming concerts, and that's basically a concert just for the people who are viewing. And that's live performance, though. And there are times where it's not perfect. And I want to just crawl under a blanket and go, I messed that up. Oops. And you just have to put on a brave face and go forward and say, well, folks, it's live. Sorry about that note. But that's happened plenty of times. My wife has told me this really great story, if I can use it as an example, of the great John Denver, wonderful vocalist who's passed on since, but he was giving a performance at the Red Rocks Amphitheater, which is beautiful, singing Rocky Mountain High, his famous song. And there's a high note in that song. And Rocky Mountain High, and he's supposed to hit this high note, and he missed it. He missed it. And he laughed, and the crowd laughed with him. And he said, folks, 1,000 nights in a row, I'll hit that note. Welcome to night 1,001. And, everyone laughed. And it's like, it's okay. You're a great singer. It happens. And by example, I try to try to be that way. It's like, be serious about the music, but don't take yourself so seriously. So to answer your question, thousands of examples of messing up. Is I have a song. It's called the Ah Ooh song. And while we were recording that in the studio, I kept on making mistakes. I was messing up. And it was just me and the engineer in the studio. And let's try it again, and I would say expletive when I would mess up, and he the mic is hot, so he would take all those expletives and record and put them in a folder. And it was kind of like a running joke, like got another one, and he was collecting all my failures, so to speak. And I think that's very funny. So that folder of audio files is somewhere. I don't know where it is.
Oh no, I would hate to have an audio file of times I messed up, but I mean, it's always a great way to look back at it because I love getting to talk about times that we don't always do everything 100% correctly because it's showing that it's okay to make mistakes. And I think that's something important because a lot of times with social media, it's just kind of like a highlight reel. And a lot of kids are now just growing up around social media. They don't know really anything else but that. So it's important to know that it's okay to make those mistakes and they're good to help you learn down the road.
Absolutely. Yeah, I used to when I was in college, my college roommate, a good a buddy of mine, is an illustrator, and I would watch him work as I'm watching you work. He would. he start with pencil and paper and make a beautiful, absolutely, it looked like a photograph, beautiful, like of a woman. I remember he did a portrait. It was gorgeous. Then that's only part one. I thought he must be done. Looks like a picture. It must be done. He said, "Oh no, this is just the beginning stage." And then he would proceed to blur the lines and make it imperfect on purpose, and then add paint and shading, etc., to where it would have an emotional feel to it. And the goal was never perfection. The goal was never to have it look perfectly like a photograph. The goal, later learned, was to give it a feeling by making it imperfect. And I think music is the same way. It can be metrically and with intonation perfect, 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 on, as we say, on the grid. But I think it sounds more interesting if those lines are blurred a little bit, you know, to sort of portray some sort of emotion behind the music, as opposed to just perfection.
Absolutely. I think that's a wonderful way of putting it too, blurring the lines because too often everything's so sharp and on point that it's kind of hard to forget that sometimes those blurred spots are where the beauty comes in.
Yep, yep, quite often.
Are there any memories that you can think of during your career so far that have been like something that you'll always treasure as something that was very important to you and ended up being something that was just absolutely incredible you never thought would happen?
Wow. Couple things. Right behind me on the piano, there's I found this. It's a what it is a DVD set, the tall one that says HAMP, HAMP, and that is for Lionel Hampton. And years ago, I was in Disney World playing at their jazz club when they used to have a jazz club at Pleasure Island, with my group, and who was in the audience but Lionel Hampton, this famous, famous jazz musician. He was much older and he had since suffered a stroke, so he had a difficult time speaking. In fact, he had a translator to help me understand what he was saying. And he was fascinated with something, an electric wind instrument that I was playing. Looks like a saxophone, sort of, or a clarinet, but it's electronic. And he was, pointing at it and asking me to come over to his table. So I was summoned by the great Lionel Hampton to give him a demonstration of this instrument. And I was couldn't have been more honored. And he was, and this is the thing, he was much older then, late 80s, I think, definitely in his 80s. But he was like a kid. He was like a kid on Christmas Day, so fascinated by this instrument. And I just love that the short moment I had with him to converse and show him how it worked. And he was, even though his body was old, his mind was like a kid. It was really
Well,
neat
that's
memory.
amazing. I
Yeah,
can't even imagine how cool that must have been, especially if you look up to a person for so long.
yeah, yeah. It's like, what, I'm going to teach you something? Okay. So, yeah,
It seems daunting at first too, especially if you've looked up to another person's work and they're like, "No, teach me something." It's like,
yeah,
"Am I
right.
qualified to do this?"
Yeah, 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 yeah. I can. Yeah, here's how it works. This is what it does. Yeah. It was fun though, fun conversation. But there have been many memories. Once, Ty mentioned David Sanborn before. I was on tour with the Rippingtons, and they have big jazz festivals over there. I think it was the Montreux Jazz Festival, and David Sanborn was playing. Uh, but we were to play after somewhere, one of the other stages. So basically, I wasn't able to attend his concert. But I, off in the distance, I could hear him. So it was fun to hear him in his tent where he was playing across the field. I could hear him perfectly because it was loud. And I was playing along with him because I know all his songs. And I was like, maybe, so far away, but I could still play with him. It was fun to literally play with David Sanborn, even though he had no idea.
Oh,
Being
that sounds
playing
like
the melodies with
fun.
him, it's like connecting with one of my favorite artists. It was a special memory. I think I was in a
Wow.
stairwell warming up, and I could hear him, so I started playing with him.
Oh, how cool. That sounds like that must have been so much fun. And I've been to a few jazz festivals, so I can totally admit the energy that goes on there when different acts are performing is just so much fun. So I can't even imagine.
Yeah, I mean and that's the perfect word for it. Festival. It's something to be celebrated, and it's not just the audience and the artist. Other artists are fans of artists, so it's fun that way.
Absolutely. Now, fun little question because you had mentioned before you've been doing stuff on Facebook Live and you teach at a community college. Is there any projects you've been working on or anything that you'd want to share with us that you've been doing lately?
Sure, yeah. I'm just now finishing that 11th album, or halfway through uh, mixing it, and I'm feeling pretty good about it. It should be out, releasing it to the wilds in March. And these days, what's different for this album and the previous album, what's different is that I'm now the label, little old me. In other words,
Wow.
I'm not with a company, so to speak. Uh, it's mostly because there was no companies around. A lot of them have closed shop. So the landscape of the music business has changed a bit to where the underdog, like me, just a single person, can actually produce your own CD and get it printed and get it distributed. With the help of another company called like CD Baby, and off it goes. So you kind of like aggregate or put all the components of what would be a label. You can put them together yourself. And that's, again, going back to the earlier question about business. I wish I would have studied more about business. However, as you know, things are always changing. So the music industry now is nothing like it was 20 years ago. Yeah, so you got to constantly adapt
Absolutely.
and change, which is what jazz musicians and artists do.
And you guys do a very good job at it too because the industry is ever changing.
Yeah, yeah. It's exciting times. It really is.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, last question for you, my favorite one, because I feel like it ties up the entire episode, puts it in a nice bow. If there's a kid watching this right now, or even an adult who's interested in getting into the industry or just even curious about learning more of it, what do you think the one lesson they should walk away from watching this is?
Ah, that's a heavy question. I would say, yeah, I can remember starting this journey back in the eighth grade like it was yesterday. So I would say to that eighth grader, you know, stay focused and believe in your own voice. That is something that I've had to grow into. I think every person does that, right? Whether you're pursuing the arts or not, just believing in yourself. And but by what I mean is, I almost felt like for years I had to have someone's permission in order to be a jazz musician. Like as if there was a rite of passage. If you can play this song, or if you can play this fast, or if you can play this high, then you're a jazz musician. And the truth of the matter is, none of that's true. The only person from whom you need permission is yourself to do anything, you know. And it's removing those roadblock, those can'ts. I can't do this. I shouldn't do that. Once you remove all those, it's open road, and you can do whatever it is you want to do. You can pursue anything.
That is wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I think anybody in any field can learn so much from that. And I just really appreciate that. So thank you for sharing that with us. And
Oh,
now comes my favorite part of the episode where I get to show you what I was working on over here. I'm going to
yes.
warn you in advance. My lights do mess with the color, so I will send you an actual copy so you can see it in its entirety. But I'm going to
Wait,
try to get this up in here without issue.
that's great. Wonderful.
Well, thank you again so much for coming on, and thank you again to everyone who tuned into this episode. Again, I'm your host and in house artist, Erin Leffler. Catch you next time on the drawing board.